So Bernie Sanders surprisingly went back on Joe Rogan's podcast, and I don't know why I did this to myself, but I decided to watch it, and here we are with me making a video now because there are things that happened in this podcast that I feel compelled to respond to because that's just the way I am. So let me just say that first and foremost, Bernie Sanders did fine, but I do believe that this interview demonstrates the limitations of getting through to people like Joe Rogan. At this point, I think that he's too far gone. I still think that it's a worthwhile endeavor to try to reach some members of Joe Rogan's audience. Having said that, though, Joe Rogan did everything in his power to make sure that the conversation was not productive. Don't get me wrong, I think Bernie Sanders did a good job at explaining how money in politics has destroyed our country and hollowed out our democracy, but there were moments in it that were genuinely shocking, even to me. And I don't watch Joe Rogan all the time, but I'm aware enough to know how he's become basically Rush Limbaugh, as Kyle Kulinski put it, for all intents and purposes. Having said that, though, I was shocked to see that he's arguably at parity with Alex Jones in terms of his conspiracy theories. Like, he was denying climate change to Bernie Sanders' face, when years ago, I remember doing videos about how he was shitting on Candace Owens for denying climate change. And here he is denying climate change in a similarly ridiculous way. And it's hard to see because this man very clearly has lost his fucking mind. And I know about all of the COVID denialism and conspiracy theories regarding vaccines, but just the way that this man has devolved into a shell of his former self really is something to see. So I think that, these interviews are useful for reaching members of his audience. But at this point in time, I don't know how many members of his audience who had enough brain cells to absorb Bernie's message are still there, because listening to this man genuinely made me feel like I'm fucking stupid. That's how bad it was. I genuinely believe Bernie Sanders would have had a better conversation, a more substantive conversation with a brick wall. So let me show you what I mean. First of all, let me just preface this by saying the conversation was relatively cordial. Joe Rogan tried to push back on Bernie Sanders when Bernie Sanders was being logical because he didn't want too much common sense getting through to the audience. But for the most part, they seemed to like each other. Joe Rogan asked Bernie Sanders if he was going to run for president again, hinting that he would support him. Bernie Sanders said no, basically. At the end of the podcast, Bernie Sanders stupidly said that Joe Rogan is doing a good job and he likes podcasts because you can speak at length, unlike in mainstream media. And Bernie, shut the fuck up. You don't know what you're talking about. You haven't watched Joe Rogan long enough to know that this man has turned into Alex Jones 2.0. But I mean, Bernie Sanders did sit through that interview with Joe Rogan's conspiracy theory, so he probably shouldn't have said that. The compliments triggered me, Bernie. I will be honest about that. But there are moments in there where Joe Rogan just dropped dumb bombs that Bernie didn't know how to respond to, despite them being cordial towards each other. Like, I don't remember what Bernie was talking about, but Joe Rogan just brought up how COVID was like manufactured in a lab and purposefully spread or something like that. Bernie Sanders just kind of brushed it aside, because how do you respond to that when somebody cooks up a conspiracy theory? I mean, you don't know what kernel of truth they're basing that on or where they pulled it from, probably his asshole. But like, how do you even respond to something like that? It's crazy. But let's zero in on the moments that irritated me the most. I have 3 clips for you. Let's start with the shorter one. And this kind of demonstrates that Joe Rogan has no self-awareness whatsoever. So he talks about, they're talking about how division is bad and bigotry. Like, there's just no place in modern day politics for bigotry. We should move past that. And Joe Rogan dropped something that shows you this man has never had a second of introspection in his entire life.
There's so many issues out there.
Right.
Hatred should not be evaluated. So
it's also the political exploitation of division. The fact that you can use the division that people already have to galvanize your side instead of unite the country.
Hey, dumb bitch, the guy that you brought on your show and endorsed and went to the inauguration of benefits from this type of divisive politics, the divisive politics that keeps working class people at each other's throats. So it's beneficial for capitalists to continue to sow division. It's why fascists come along during late-stage capitalism, because it's very effective at stopping the working class from rising up and overthrowing the bourgeoisie. There's another moment where Joe Rogan, he's also kind of like talking about how hate is bad, man. Ironic coming from him of all people. But then he says something like, why is gay marriage still a thing? Why are we talking about this? I don't know, because of motherfuckers you bring on your show who are explicitly bigoted towards LGBTQ plus people. And I love how he's pretending as if he's not participating in the division when he shits on trans people nonstop, accused LGBTQ plus people, gay people in particular, of being groomers. It's just so fucking rich for him of all people to LARP as somebody who I guess is like semi-woke now that you have a Democrat on. Like, Joe Rogan is a fucking political chameleon. He will morph into whatever based on the political ideology of whoever he's talking to. And now it kind of shows you he's fallen much further because he didn't align with Bernie entirely compared to the last interview. But you know, it's funny that him of all people, after bringing on individuals who are basically Nazis, like Matt Walsh, who self-identifies as a theocratic fascist, and letting him lie about trans people and LGBTQ plus people, he's like, man, we got to stop the hate. Well, I mean, maybe the call's coming from inside the house, Joe. Maybe it starts with you. But let's get to the climate change portion, because this portion honestly made me want to video game myself, if you know what I mean. Joe Rogan takes a study about climate change and he completely bastardizes it. So let's watch, and as you're going to see, Bernie doesn't really know how to respond to it, but when we come back, I will tell you why Joe Rogan is dead fucking wrong and being disingenuous purposefully so.
Did you see the Washington Post piece that they wrote where they did this long-term view? First of all, the reality is that the Earth's temperature has never been static, right? We could both agree on that. It's always been up and down. There's been ice ages and heat waves. And then the Washington Post looked at it. What was the time period that they looked at? That essentially they found that we're in a cooling period. That the Earth over the past X amount of years, and this was like a very inconvenient discovery, but they had to report the data, and kudos to them for doing that. Scientists have captured the Earth's climate change over the last 485 million years. Here's a surprising place we stand now. So look at the far end of that graph, and you see we're in a cooling period.
Well, I'm not sure. No, I didn't read that article, but
Yeah.
The scientists who are out there, I think.
I know, but there's a lot of money involved in that too, Bernie. That's part of the problem. There's a lot of money involved in this whole climate change emergency issue, and there's a lot of control. And that's a big part of this problem.
So there is a lot to respond to there, but first and foremost, let me just say that Joe Rogan, at this point in the podcast, sat through a significant portion of it of Bernie Sanders telling him how money in politics is a problem, how rich people, oligarchs, special interests, multinational corporations buy off politicians to get them to do their bidding. And Joe Rogan implies that, oh, that's happening, albeit on the scientific side. Like, I guess there's some big science lobby that's buying politicians to push climate change. What progress have we made towards climate change, Joe? We are barreling towards climate catastrophe. We see severe weather events taking place every single year. We now have a fire season every single year. And you think that the real issue isn't big oil pushing climate denial, it's big science? I guess that's what he's getting at. But the thing that irked me is that he read the same article that I read, and his takeaway was that, oh, we're actually in a global cooling period. Now, what he is saying there is a complete and utter misrepresentation of the article. The article goes back millions and millions and millions and millions and millions of fucking years. They are not denying climate change in this article. They are confirming beyond a shadow of a doubt that climate change is real and it's man-made. But Joe Rogan read that, or maybe he just read the headline and saw that little graph and thought, oh, I guess this means climate change is fake. But that's not what it's saying. So I'm just going to read you 3 paragraphs from this fact check produced by USA Today where they quote the authors. And it tells you how Joe Rogan misconstrued this article so badly. Quote, the scientific paper covered by the Washington Post was published in the journal Science in September, explaining Earth's temperature trends across the last 485 million fucking years. I added the fucking for emphasis. Its authors, including lead author Emily Judd, a paleoclimate researcher at the Smithsonian Natural History Museum, combined fossilized evidence and climate models to determine global temperatures have been much warmer in the past. However, rather than demonstrating that that modern global warming is a hoax, the study states that modern temperatures are warming more rapidly than at any other point in the study period. It also states that warmer temperatures are correlated with higher atmospheric CO2 levels throughout the study period, an observation that is consistent with the enormous body of research that shows modern global warming is driven by CO2. Quote, I've seen quite a bit of misinformation crop up surrounding our paper, particularly the claim that we, humans, have nothing to worry about with respect to climate change since the Earth has been warmer for much of the last 500 million years, Judd told USA Today. I cannot stress enough how reductive and problematic this viewpoint is. But yet, Joe Rogan takes that study, twists it to his millions of viewers, and implies that actually global warming isn't a problem, it's global cooling, so maybe we should do more to heat up the planet. Context completely stripped away from the article, taking the main conclusion, twisting it for his own political aims. It's wild how biased he is. But ironically, in this next video that we're going to play, he talks about the biased media and why it's good that Donald Trump is suing them. So Bernie Sanders talks about Trump's authoritarianism and how it worries him. And he brings up the lawsuits that Trump has launched against, the Des Moines Register, ABC News, CBS. And Joe Rogan defends these lawsuits from Donald Trump. And this whole portion is 12 minutes long, and they go in circles. Bernie Sanders explains that, you can't sue media because they publish something you don't like, but then Joe Rogan buds in and says, yeah, but this, yeah, but that, yeah, but this, yeah, but that. And Bernie Sanders, again, repeats, it's the First Amendment. You can't sue somebody for saying something you don't like. They say something about me. I don't sue them. And then Joe Rogan agrees, but then says, yeah, but what about this? And it goes on and on and on and on and on. Let me just show you a small portion of that. It is insufferable because he never consumes what Bernie Sanders is telling him. It's one in one ear and out the other. But let's just watch, and then we'll talk about it when we come back.
And I got to say, one of the things, and there was a lot of arguments about Trump, that worries me very, very much is this movement toward authoritarianism and going after media, suing media, taking away the authority that Congress has.
When you say suing media, are you talking about the CBS lawsuit?
Among other things.
Right, but don't you think there's a real issue with what they did?
No. In this
you
sense,
don't think that there's a real issue in editing conversations to give someone an answer that's different than what they really answered?
Joe, I've been on 8 zillion shows, right? In my life.
Okay.
Now, should I sue you if you ask me some stupid question that I don't like, right? Or that you do something. Should I sue you?
Yeah, but that's not what he's getting. Well, he has
sued. He has sued ABC. Mm-hmm. He has sued Meta. He is suing the Des Moines Register because of a poll that came out during the campaign that he didn't like. All right. He is suing CBS for this Kamala Harris interview. So do I think how many? I cannot tell you the number of stories done about me that were not good stories.
Right.
That were dishonest stories. That's what a free press is about. You don't like it, you got to live with it. All right? You do something, I'm not going to sue you, Joe.
Right, but it's not that simple, right?
Suing media has the impact of intimidating media. All right, if somebody sues you, all right, let me finish. All right.
Okay.
Somebody sues you, why not you? You could be sued tomorrow, right? Because you are doing this. You're too sympathetic to this.
Right.
And Joe, you did that. And they have a big law firm behind you. You're going to have to spend zillions of dollars defending yourself. You know what? Next time you do an interview, you say, maybe I'm not going to go in that area. Right?
No, but it's not that. It's editing things. It's deceptive editing.
Joe,
so in deceptive editing, you give people a different perception of who this candidate is than reality.
All right, but you got to explain.
But that's not objective journalism.
I know, but
that's campaigning for that person.
Right, if I were to sue everybody who said things that were factually incorrect about me, I'd be suing people zillions of times. But Joe, what you're saying is, look, does media get it wrong sometimes? Absolutely. Should you have the most powerful person in America suing media? What is the impact of that? The impact is clearly intimidation.
My concern is when you have media organizations that are purported to be objective, and then they say things that are defamatory and factually incorrect, and they should know that before they say it. what other course does a person have other than a lawsuit?
Now, you saw a small snippet of that part of the conversation, but if you watched it back 4 times, that would be as insufferable as it was, because that's basically what happened. Like, Joe Rogan just repeats himself again and again and again. Joe Rogan, you yourself have defamed people. You've defamed trans people on your program. You've lied. You've spread misinformation. Do you really want to open Pandora's box and sue people for biased coverage? Because your coverage is certainly biased. What, is it different because you don't purport to be a journalist? I mean, imagine like if there was a Democratic president and they decided to sue Joe Rogan if he criticized them. He wouldn't like that. He'd say, hey, this is an attack on my First Amendment rights. But since it is liberal media that Trump is suing, and since he likes Trump and doesn't like liberal media, who's lied about him as well, according to him, well, he thinks it's bad. He is incapable of putting himself outside of his own subjectivity or understanding how he wouldn't like this if the shoe were on the other foot, nor is he able to understand Bernie Sanders' broader point about the First fucking Amendment, which Joe Rogan in the past has purported to support. In fact, he's claimed that like the First Amendment is like the biggest issue ever, but yet here he can't conceive of why it is bad for the President of the United States to sue media companies for publishing things that they don't like. I mean, I think Kyle Kulinski has been right on the money about this, that this is basically the modern day equivalent of Rush Limbaugh. And he used to be this individual who was just like curious and he wanted to ask questions and get different perspectives. But now it's very clear that he only wants his pre-existing perspective and preconceived notions about politics to be confirmed. And if his guest doesn't do that, then he gets a little bit sensitive. Not enough to really push back, but enough to just say, hey, this doesn't sound right to me because I was told X, Y, and Z by these billionaires who come on to a lot of my audience. It was a disaster. It was a disaster overall. And to see how stupid and annoying Joe Rogan was, only to have Bernie Sanders compliment him at the end and be like, keep up the good job. That was awful to see. So look, I'm not going to shit on Bernie Sanders for going on Joe Rogan's program. I think that there are benefits to it, but certainly, you know, it's a cost-benefit analysis that you have to make. I think that Bernie Sanders is really, really good at explaining basic issues about democracy and American corruption. But if you are not equipped to deal with somebody who rapid fires conspiracy theories at you at 100, miles an hour, I think it's gonna end up not being a very productive conversation. I don't think that this conversation necessarily was unproductive. I kind of am giving you that impression unintentionally by showing you the negatives. For the most part, it was okay. Bernie Sanders got off really good points. But the moments that were bad were truly horrific. And I would encourage you to watch the full thing for yourself so you can make your own assessment about, the conversation that they had. Having said that, though, my God, Joe Rogan is absolutely gonzo. His brain is cooked beyond recognition. And the fact that this man has millions of people listening to every single show horrifies me to no end, because the bullshit that was spewing out of this man's mouth was just genuinely horrifying to me. So my God, I hope that the people who watch, at least like not all of them, don't absorb every fucking thing that he says, because if they do, we're doomed. I get that like he's the biggest podcast ever, but not 100% of the country is listening to him. But still, it's a large enough portion that it horrifies me to think that people take this man seriously when he should not be taken seriously by anyone.
Like everywhere there's glows. You see them all the time. I mean, it's constant. My children will be like, Mama, glow, 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 glow. I turn on TV, there's glows in the background. Every TV show, news media,
glow, 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 glow. They're everywhere. Glow, 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 glow.